LoveLore Library. Chapter 586. Her face was red, and her palms were so hot that a layer of skin was about to fall off. She pursed her lips and stared at him. Tang Axian is waiting for me. At this time, her long hair was loose, and she was wearing home clothes, which made her look indescribably soft. This was how he imagined his little wife to look like. However, soon, the home clothes fell to the ground and piled up at her feet. Tang Yu. Pei Chi bit her lips and almost cried out. Then, she was pressed against the door. You want to sleep with Tang Axian? Tang Yu pressed down on his tender little girl, intending to bully her. Then his voice became a little meaningful. Then, I'll carry you. As he said that, he really wanted to carry her and open the door to go out. Pei Chi was about to cry. How could she go out in her current state? She wrapped her little hands around his waist and buried her face in his neck. No. Then, she bit his neck angrily. Bad guy, he did it on purpose. But this made it seem like she was hugging him and not letting him go out. And she was so fragile because of him. Aren't you going to sleep with your sister? Now, I'll carry you out and let your sister see what big brother and big sister are doing. Tang Yu turned his face, and his warm lips were on her cheek. Pei Chi was pounding on his shoulder and kicking her little feet. For a moment, it was just passion, but now it became full of perverted desire. Tang Yu pressed against her passionately. Although he was very passionate, he was still able to restrain himself. He did not forget that Tang Axian was waiting there, and she could rush in at any time. He exhaled with difficulty, looked down at the little girl who was blushing, and said hoarsely, I'll let you go. Pei Chi softened in his arms. At this time, she still dared to provoke him. Actually, it's for nothing. Tang Yu understood immediately. For nothing. Pei Chi, other than giving birth, do you think? I can't make you scream with pleasure. He pressed his lips against her ear, his voice warm. Let's give it a try now. Let's see how Boss Pei kept pestering me when he couldn't conceive. He was so shameless. Pei Chi buried herself in his arms, unable to listen to a single word. And he laughed in a low voice, a deep laugh that shook his heart. He reached out and stroked her long hair. Chi, leave before I change my mind. Otherwise, he could not guarantee what he would do to her. Pei Chi widened her eyes and glared at him. Her eyes were filled with seductive moisture. He exhaled with difficulty. Before she left, he suddenly grabbed her little arm and said in a low voice, Chi. She looked at him pitifully. This made Tang Yu want to tease her again. His long slender fingers gently touched her red lips, and his voice was also low. What should I do? You're not ovulating. She blushed and bit his neck. Jerk. His side face was close to hers, and there was a touch of clarity in his eyes. That was the expression that she was most familiar with. No matter how many times he did it, Pei Chi was still shy. She wrapped her little hands around his neck. I'm leaving. Tang Yu looked at her deeply. All his feelings were written in his eyes. She rubbed against him coquettishly. Otherwise, Tang Axian will be anxious later. You don't want to be interrupted, right? Chapter 587. Pei Chi walked out of the bathroom wearing only a set of white pajamas. Her skin was pinkish, and her long hair was tied into a ponytail. She looked pure and alluring at the same time. Pei Chi, I'm starting to regret letting you go. He grabbed her and kissed her sweet little neck again and again. His slightly cold nose touched hers, and it was a little ticklish. Pei Chi pressed her face against his chest. She bit her lips and said, I'm done. Her eyes were watery, and she looked like she was going to die. Tang Yu kissed her for a long time before letting her go. When Pei Chi walked out, her legs were weak, and her entire body was weak. When she reached the room, she closed the door and looked inside. Tang Axayan had already fallen asleep. Her face was tilted, and her skinny face looked adorable and beautiful. Pei Chi watched on, feeling a little sour and bitter in her heart. She walked over slowly, but did not sit on the bed. Instead, she squatted in front of Tang Axayan. She reached out to brush Tang Axayan's hair aside, and said softly, "I'll think of something." She thought Tang Axayan had fallen asleep, but she woke up again. In a daze, she hugged Pei Chi-Chi's arm and called out, "Chi-Chi." Pei Chi-Chi's heart was wet, and there was an indescribable feeling in it. "It'll be fine, Tang Axayan. I promise." She bent down slightly and kissed Tang Axayan. This little person really made her feel like her flesh and blood had melded together. This was a feeling that Pei Huan had never given her before. The next day, Pei Chi-Chi did not go to work. She stayed at home to accompany Tang Axayan. Tang Yu went to the company early in the morning, but at 4 in the afternoon, he sent a car to pick her up to the salon. Of course, Pei Chi-Chi also called Xiao Wen along. Tang Axayan lay on the sofa, looking at Pei Chi-Chi and Xiao Wen. Really, they were so beautiful. Little one wore a light blue long gown. The design of the gown accentuated her figure. In the past, she had never realized that little one was so well endowed. Pei Chi-Chi took out a diamond necklace from the jewelry box and put it on for her. It was real. It had the finishing touch. Little one looked at herself in the mirror and couldn't believe it. Very pretty. Pei Chi-Chi smiled. Good luck. Little one blushed a little. Then, she turned to look at the row of gowns. Boss Pei, you can't just patronize me. There's still an hour left. Hurry up and pick one for yourself. Just as Pei Chi-Chi was about to speak, Tang Axayan pointed at one of the items and exclaimed, "This one looks good." She even ran over to retrieve the gown and presented it to Pei Chi-Chi. "It's really beautiful." As he said this, he pushed her away. "Hurry up and change." Pei Chi-Chi glanced at Tang Axayan and followed the staff inside. When she came out, she had a strange expression on her face. Tang Axayan swallowed hard. Good heavens! She was really beautiful beyond the horizon. The silver evening gown on Pei Chi-Chi made her look like a mermaid. The gown was very conservative. Everything that should be covered was covered, but the upper body was very close-fitting, small shoulders, a small waist, and small breasts. There was an intricate diamond ring around her waist, and below it were layers of chiffon that reached her feet. The highlight of the gown was the pair of small arms that were exposed. It was not an exaggeration to say that her skin was as white as snow. It was so soft and tender that it made one want to take a bite. Tang Axayan stood there and stared at it. She reached out her hand to touch it in an unruly manner and gasped. Chapter 588. Tang Axayan reached out again and touched it as if it was an antique. Chi-Chi, no wonder Big Brother became worse than a beast. Pei Chi-Chi pinched her little face. Nonsense. At the side, Xiao Wen was laughing so hard that she was about to die from laughter. Tang Axayan pursed her lips and muttered, "That's true. Even I want to touch it when I see it. What's more, Big Brother." Pei Chi-Chi's gown was designed to be flat-shouldered, so she only wore a diamond necklace on her wrist. 2 strands of her long hair were pulled out from both sides and fastened at the back with diamond clips. She looked pure and sexy at the same time. She stood and looked at herself in the mirror, so beautiful. Tang Axayan carefully held the hem of her dress. "Chi-Chi, you just have to be as beautiful as a flower." Little one was still narcissistic just now, but now she felt that she had been beaten to a pulp. How should she put it? Any meticulously dressed woman seemed a little crude in front of Boss Pei. Her beauty was sweet and moving, like a moving oil painting. The silver gown that she wore tonight made her look even more fairy-like, so beautiful that it glowed, so beautiful that it shone. This shock lasted all the way to the celebration banquet that night. The entrance of the five-star hotel owned by the Lin Corporation was filled with luxury cars and fragrant clothes. There was a long red carpet at the entrance, and reporters stood on both sides. Their cameras flashed from time to time as the guests walked on the red carpet. Almost all the important clients that had dealings with the Lin Corporation or Marvel were here. What's more, the reporters were surprised and crazy to find Old Master Lin was here. Lin Yun was here. Tang Ziyuan was here. The three of them rarely appeared together because of their close relationship. But the person who appeared with Lin Yun was Zhao Yi. The reporters were even crazier. Was the former Mrs. Tang going to have a second round? If that was the case, wouldn't Tang Ziyuan's face be slapped when he appeared at the same time? For a moment, the red carpet was very lively. Tang Ziyuan was in a bad mood. Lin Yun had asked him to come, saying that it was important. Wasn't it just a celebration banquet? He thought that she had changed her mind, but who knew that when he came here, she actually appeared at the same time as Zhao Yi. Originally, he wanted to question them. Firstly, there were too many people. Secondly, the pregnant model had not yet agreed to abort the child, so he had no right to do so. Therefore, Tang Ziyuan watched as Lin Yun and Zhao Yi stood side by side. Although their actions weren't too excessive, it still made him furious. However, Tang Ziyuan was a celebrity after all, and it was an occasion like this, so he could only suppress his dissatisfaction. When he passed by Lin Yun, he asked in a low voice, "What's going on? Didn't she know that two tigers couldn't share the same mountain?" After all, this was a big deal for Marvel, which was owned by the Lin family. He was the son-in-law of the Lin family. Wasn't she deliberately making things difficult for him by standing together with Zhao Yi? Lin Yun looked at him indifferently, then slowly said, "It's nothing, of course. If you don't want to, you can leave." Tang Ziyuan's heart is in a mess. She has nothing to fear now when she is with other wild men. At this moment, Tang Yu walked out of the hotel. The moment he walked out, he was extremely eye-catching. Usually, Tang Yu was very particular and noble, but today, he was even more eye-catching, very formal, almost cautious. Chapter 589. Tang Yu greeted the elders one by one. When he saw Tang Ziyuan, he nodded. "Dad." Tang Ziyuan's heart was in a mess. He pursed his lips. It was rare to see 5 people in the same frame. The reporters had always had a keen sense of smell. They immediately realized that Tang Ziyuan was unhappy because of Lin Yun and Zhao Yi. What a melodramatic drama. They didn't care how ugly Tang Ziyuan's expression was. They pressed the shutter. Tang Ziyuan's expression was getting worse. However, no one cared about his feelings. Just like when he abandoned Lin Yun, he didn't care about Lin Yun's feelings either. Fortunately, a black limousine slowly stopped in front of the red carpet. Tang Ziyuan saw that it was Xing Yuan's limousine. The only person who could sit in this limousine was Pei Chi. Sure enough, Tang Yu walked over there. The chauffeur got out of the car. He was wearing white gloves and a well-ironed uniform. He opened the back door of the car. Pei Chi got out of the car slowly. Her silver gown shone on the entire red carpet. She stood there beautifully with her black hair and red lips in the strong night wind. Just like that, for the first time, she stood face to face with him in front of everyone. At this moment, she was called Pei Chi. She proved herself and was no longer anyone's accessory. Tang Yu's steps were very fast at first. When he saw her, he slowed down. Finally, he stood under the starry sky and looked at his beautiful girl deeply. His Chi-Chi was so beautiful that he wanted to hide her and not let others see her. The young man's eyes were moist for the first time. It was on this day that his Chi-Chi sacrificed a lot just to stand together with him. Although she didn't say it, he knew his girl's pride very well. Tang Yu smiled at her. There was a deep love in his eyes that only she could see. Finally, she slowly walked towards him, step by step. Every step he took was filled with his deep love. He was calling out, "Chi-Chi, come here." Finally, she walked to his side. Tang Yu's voice was a little hoarse. "Boss Pei, you look very beautiful today." She couldn't move her eyes away from his face. Her lips curled into a smile. "You too, Mr. Tang." Tang Yu looked around and suddenly thought of something. "Pei Chi-Chi, if I do something now, would you be surprised or moved to tears?" "What?" She didn't even have time to react. Tang Yu knelt down on one knee, kneeling in front of the tender little girl. The moon and the stars were proof. The crowd exclaimed in surprise. "Heavens! Mr. Tang is proposing." The young man's face was unprecedentedly moved. He raised his head, and with an incomparably humble and arrogant posture, he said, "Pei Chi-Chi, I'm willing to use the rest of my life to love you, torture you, make you happy, make you unhappy. When I see you happy, I'll be happy. When I see you angry, I'll be even happier. Are you willing to accept such a Mr. Tang?" Pei Chi-Chi looked at him with tears in her eyes, but she pouted. "Pervert." Tang Yu smiled and took out a ring from his pocket with one hand. He still looked up at her and said, "Pei Chi-Chi, can you accept such a pervert as your husband?" He opened it with one hand, and a shining heart-shaped diamond ring appeared. Tang Yu seemed to be holding his heart in front of Pei Chi-Chi. Pei Chi-Chi's voice was a little hoarse. "What about you?" Chapter 590. There was a round of warm applause. The reporters did not expect to see a marriage proposal today. So romantic. Little Wen wiped away the cat urine. What? She had finally dressed up like this, and now she was not in the limelight. She wiped her tears. Dink handed her a tissue and smiled faintly. "Every girl will have such a day, but it may not be as grand as this." Little One was touched. "But..." He paused and said venomously, "However, Little One, you are not as beautiful as Boss Pei. So, you have to lower your expectations." Little One glared at him. Dink smiled. "Okay, let's go in." Little One glanced at him. "I will watch for a while more." On the other side, Tang Yu got up along Pei Chi-Chi's arm and went forward to hug her. She was completely in his arms and was restrained by him. Later, it was a very restrained kiss. "Mrs. Tang, you can't run away." Tang Yu's voice was a little shaky. He was not as calm as he looked. Pei Chi-Chi's little hands wrapped around his waist, and her face was on his shoulder. She said 3 words in a very small voice. His body stiffened. After a long time, he pushed her away and carefully looked at her little face. His gaze was deep. She thought he would ask her to say it again. However, he only smiled. "Mrs. Tang, you can say it again tonight for me." As he spoke, he took her little hand and walked to the old master and Lin Yun. "Greet them." Pei Chi-Chi obediently called Grandpa, and when it came to Lin Yun, she called her mom like a kitten. Tang Ziyuan saw that Lin Yun's expression did not change and could not help but sigh. His ex-wife was really open-minded. He was a little emotional. It seemed that no one cared about him, and no one cared about his past with Zhao Ku. Yes, everyone was happy. Why would they care about him? Would they care about a dead person, a Zhao Ku? Tang Ziyuan had a feeling that the situation was over, and he looked a little disappointed. Luckily, Pei Chi had only called Zhao Yi as Uncle Zhao. If she had called him father, Tang Ziyuan would have spat out a mouthful of blood. Lin Yun gave him a red packet, and Zhao Yi calmly took out a red packet as well. This meant that they knew about it beforehand. When Zhao Yi took the red envelope, the old man coughed softly. Little Zhao, you can't miss this. Tang Yu only got married once. If it's not enough, I'll make it up in the future. Zhao Yi was very easygoing and did not get angry because of the old man's childish temper. However, there was one person who was angry. It was Tang Ziyuan. Why was Lin Yun and Zhao Yi giving out red packets together? Did he think that Tang Ziyuan was dead? However, no one cared about his feelings. It wasn't until it was his turn that he realized he wasn't prepared. However, Tang Ziyuan didn't want to lose face. In order to show his status as the legal wife, he said with a cold face, "What? Don't you know how to call me? Uncle Tang." No one paid attention to Pei Chi. Uncle Tang. Tang Ziyuan still snorted coldly. Who's your uncles? How can I be compared to Zhao Yi, who has no status? Tang Ziyuan's face was cold and he did not say a word. Tang Yu smiled slightly. Chi, call me father. Pei Chi looked at Tang Ziyuan. I dare to call you, do you dare to respond? Tang Ziyuan looked at Pei Chi. Little girl, why wouldn't I dare? Chapter 591. In the end, he felt a little uncomfortable, because Tang Ziyuan didn't bring a red packet. In the end, someone came over with a check, and Tang Ziyuan wrote a set of numbers. It would be embarrassing to write less, right? In the end, he wrote a check of 10 million yuan, and Tang Yu kept it for his little girl. The reporters took photos crazily, and there were flashes everywhere, but there was a cold figure standing far away. That was Shen Zhongshan. He was engaged to Zhao Ke's daughter, and she called all the elders, except him. Shen Zhongshan felt a sense of loneliness in his heart. There was an indescribable feeling in his heart. Not only Tang Yu, not only Pei Chi was going to marry Tang Yu, but also Shen Lian's defeat this time. Not long after she was transferred to the headquarters of Jin Taihe, the first project she presided over failed, and she was defeated by the unknown Pei group. Everyone in the company was not optimistic about her and thought that she was emotional. Shen Zhongshan's feelings for Pei Chi were a little complicated. He didn't love Zhao Ke, but he admired this little girl. Pei Chi was like him. Her temperament was like him, and she had the courage of his youth. Her eyes faintly revealed what he was like when he was young. But, why, such a little girl, was it Zhao Ke who gave birth to him? Shen Zhongshan could only sigh, but the reporters were not willing to let him go, and soon there were cameras capturing Shen Zhongshan. One must know, Shen Zhongshan was Shen Lian's father. Although the relationship between Tang Yu and Shen Lian was not spectacular, it did exist. So, countless microphones were aimed at Shen Zhongshan, asking him to express some thoughts. From afar, Tang Ziyuan somewhat sympathized with Shen Zhongshan. He originally thought that he was miserable enough, but at this moment, brother Shen seemed to be even more miserable. Shen Zhongshan was forced to walk in front of the bride-to-be. He looked at Pei Chi, and his voice was a little hoarse. When you get married, ask for a glass of wine. Tang Yu naturally responded with ease. No one else noticed anything strange, only Pei Chi saw that Shen Zhongshan's eyes were a little wet. Was it because he was sad? He was sad because of Shen Lian, she nodded. Shen Zhongshan looked at her deeply for a while. This child was really good-looking. In the end, the celebration party turned into an engagement party. In the opening dance, Pei Chi danced gracefully in Tang Yu's arms. Her small hand was placed on his shoulder, and the two of them were very close. They were so close that her nose was filled with his refreshing masculine scent. Coupled with the sense of abstinence, it was somewhat inexplicably seductive. Pei Chi-Chi's voice was a little soft. Why didn't you say so earlier? And why did you use Marvel's name to do this? Looking at the sparkling diamond ring on her finger, Pei Chi-Chi still didn't feel that it was real. Chapter 592. Tang Yu turned around absent-mindedly, not allowing her to look at other men. Yes, he was indeed stingy. She couldn't even take a look at other men. They hugged and danced. Others only saw Tang Yu's deep love and the handsome man and beautiful woman, but they didn't know how difficult it was for them to be able to walk together today. Lin Yun looked at them quietly, and there was a deep past in her eyes. Tang Ziyuan looked at her. At this moment, Lin Yun looked like the little girl from more than 20 years ago. There was love in her eyes. But Yun Yun, do you still have me in your love? Lin Yun felt Tang Ziyuan's gaze. When she looked back at him, she was as calm as water. That love, that hate, had long since disappeared. There was only a faint nostalgia for the past. They couldn't go back. He and Yun Yun, they couldn't go back. Tang Ziyuan's eyes were full of desolation. It took him so many years to understand. If he hadn't done those ridiculous things with Zhao Ku, even when Zhao Ku went to look for Yun Yun, would he still be very happy now? Would the person beside Yun Yun still be him? However, no one could answer these questions. Xiaowen looked at the couple in the middle of the dance floor and was so moved that she wanted to cry. They looked so compatible. It was the kind of feeling that when they stood together, there couldn't be a third person between them. Moreover, it was so beautiful that it made people want to cry. Xiaowen was afraid of losing her composure, so she picked up the cocktail beside her and drank it cup by cup. Slowly, the couple in front became more and more beautiful, because there were 4 people in front, 8 people. Why was it so messy? Xiaowen drank too much and wanted to cry. Where was her Mr. Right? At this moment, an arm was around her waist, and the man's voice was a little soft. Are you drunk? There was a faint reprimand, but it was still very doting. Xiaowen looked at them eagerly. In front of her, there were 2 men. Why were there 2 dinks? You're drunk. I'll take you to my house to lie down for a while, okay? The man's voice was coaxing. Lie down at Dink's house for a while. Xiaowen blinked her eyes and then clapped her hands. She said excitedly, Good, good. I wanted to pounce on you anyway. Now is the perfect time. Dink smiled warmly and quickly took the drunk little wildcat home. As for who was eating who, it was unknown. However, on this night, Little Wen felt the pain on her skin. The IT man was not only coquettish on the outside, but also particularly violent. She almost cried. In the middle of the night, he returned home and sobered up. He moved a little, but his whole body felt like it was broken into pieces. She suspected that she had been disassembled and reassembled. As soon as she moved, the man beside her woke up. He bent down to kiss her, and his voice was hoarse because of his desire. Little One laid on the bed with his eyes wide open, looking helplessly at his well-built body. He was naked. They were lying together, with only a blanket covering them from head to toe. Her eyes widened. She had been eaten. Dink kissed her and admired her helpless look. He chuckled in a low voice, Haven't you always been planning to take me down? Now I'm here. Oh, I can still do it twice. If you don't feel pain, let's continue. Xiaowen lay back down heavily and covered her eyes with her hands. However, she couldn't stop the man's ferocity. What was wrong? She was the one who wanted to pounce on him. Why did he bring her back to his house? Chapter 593. On the other side, Tang Yu left with Pei Chi-Chi in the middle of the banquet at the Lin Group's hotel. He had drunk a lot of wine. It was an engagement, after all. There would always be people coming to make trouble. Usually, he was serious, so no one dared to make fun of him. But tonight, none of his employees were afraid of him. They took turns to toast him, and he drank them all. At this time, he and Pei Chi-Chi were sitting in the back seat, and there was a partition between them and the driver in the front. However, this also made the back seat seem a little narrow, and his breath was everywhere. Tang Yu leaned against the back of the chair and pressed Pei Chi-Chi's little face on his shoulder. She had been obedient all the time. But he couldn't help it after a while. He turned his head and kissed her little mouth. Because of the alcohol, the breath he exhaled was scorching hot, and everywhere it went was scalding hot. Pei Chi-Chi was especially obedient tonight. When he wanted to kiss her, she climbed into his arms and sat down, obediently letting him kiss her red lips. The little thing in his arms had her eyes blurred, and her little body was fragrant and soft. She looked like she could do whatever he wanted. As a man, he naturally wanted to take her right here and now. But today was their engagement day, and he didn't want to be so hasty. So he could only rub and kiss her desperately, to reduce the burning desire. However, the fire was getting more and more intense. Tang Yu breathed out heavily. "I'll deal with you when we get home." His little thing leaned against his arms and smiled naughtily, playing with the diamond ring on her finger. Tang Yu glanced at her, reached out to untie his tie, and said hoarsely, "Do you like it, Chi-Chi?" She said very obediently, "I like it. But I like Mr. Tang more." Tang Yu was still leaning against the back of the chair, and his slender fingers found her little face. He pinched it and said, "Pei Chi-Chi, your words of love are getting better and better." Her little body leaned against his shoulder, and her little mouth was close to his ear. That was Tang Yu's sensitive area. Normally, he couldn't touch it. The way she was acting now was more or less a reckless provocation. He knew it too, but he pretended not to know. Sometimes, when the eye jade rose to a certain level, when it finally fell back down, the satisfaction would be even stronger. She leaned against his ear and smiled mischievously. "These aren't words of love. Mr. Tang, you're my real estate." That was why they were cuter than diamonds. After that, she gnawed on her real estate and provoked him without a care for her life. Apart from flirting with him, she had to admit that she also wanted him. After chewing for a long time, she finally stopped. Tang Yu lowered his head slightly. "Baby, what's wrong?" Pei Chi-Chi looked up. "I'm not ovulating." He exhaled deeply. "Chi-Chi, since when do we have sex during the ovulation period?" "You said it yourself." She lowered her head, looking very aggrieved. Tang Yu had to coax her obediently. Pei Chi-Chi leaned on his shoulder and smiled mischievously. Then she bit him. "Tang Yu, you've been tricked." He held her little face and looked at her. Pei Chi-Chi was very proud of herself. Tang Yu looked at her for a long time, and then he held her little face and kissed her hard. "Little thing. You're dead meat." As soon as they returned to the rose garden, Pei Chi-Chi jumped out of the car first. She lifted the hem of her dress and ran to the main house. She was wearing a silver dress, and under the moonlight, she looked like a little fairy. Chapter 594. When he arrived at the main house, he called for the maid and ordered that no one was allowed to enter the main house tonight. He wanted to give his little one a good beating. Tang Yu casually took off his coat and threw it on the sofa. Then, he loosened his tie, rolled it up, and walked upstairs. The lights in the main residence were also very dreamy tonight. It was extremely dense. "Chi-Chi." Tang Yu slowly walked upstairs and called out to his little girl. "Mrs. Tang." But it was quiet all the way to the bedroom. Tang Yu stood there and smiled. He put his tie aside and sat on the sofa. He put his fingers on his forehead and smiled dotingly. Mrs. Tang, if you don't come out soon, I can guarantee that you won't be able to sleep tonight. For a while, there was no sound. Tang Yu rested for a while. When he was about to get up, his little one came out of the changing room. She was only wearing a white shirt. His white shirt. Apart from that shirt, he couldn't see anything else. The loose shirt on her little body looked glamorous and sexy. Especially her tender legs, he couldn't take his eyes off them. Tang Yu didn't move, but his voice was hoarse. Chi-Chi, come here. He reached out to her. That little person slowly walked over barefooted and climbed onto his knees like a little wild cat. Tang Yu's voice was hoarse. Where did you get this? As he said that, his large palm uncontrollably moved inside. It was just as he had imagined. There was nothing inside. His breathing became hotter, and the way he looked at her also became a little more passionate. You found it in the wardrobe. She obediently hugged his neck and begged him. Brother. Tang Yu's beast blood was all ignited. He used some brute force to hold her in his arms and pinched her sharp chin with his jade-like fingers. Pei Chi-Chi, do you want to die? Her long hair was let down and fell on her thin shoulders. Coupled with the pure white shirt, she looked petite and elegant. Her little hands were clinging to his neck. She was calling him brother, brother in a jumble. As an elder brother, how could he endure it? Tang Yu's eyes were so deep that he couldn't look her in the eye. He kissed her lips. Mrs. Tang, let's take it slow. He was in such bad taste that she deliberately seduced him, and though he was eager, he took his time. It was so slow that Pei Chi-Chi wanted to cry, a young girl like that, wearing his shirt, crying and begging him. No man would be able to endure such a situation. What's more, he was a beast shifter. However, Tang Yu still held back, torturing her with evil interest. It was really interesting to see her begging him. The girl's eyelids were pink, and her long eyelashes were trembling. There were a few drops of tears on them, and they rolled down with every blink. Tang Yu lowered his head and kissed the tear away with his hot lips. Then, he stretched out his beautiful fingers and gently touched her little mouth. His voice was meaningful. Chi-Chi, you can still beg for one more time. She opened her eyes and looked at him. Her eyes were dazzling. Tang Yu couldn't help but bend down and kiss her pink eyelids. He teased, Chi-Chi, I want to eat you up if you act like this. Chapter 595. In the end, she had no choice but to raise her body and whisper in his ear. She acted coquettishly, complimented him, and said whatever he wanted to hear. She called him Big Brother and Dad. In the end, she was even forced to say some vulgar words that made her blush. Only then did he do as she wished and let go. The night was long. The slightly drunk Tang Yu did not seem to be tired as he wrapped his arms around her little body again and again. Sweat dripped down. He only let her go when the sky started to brighten. Knowing that his little girl loved to be clean, he cleaned her up and hugged her to sleep. The two of them were only wearing a thin bathrobe. When they hugged each other, there was a warmth of closeness. Her long hair was wrapped around each other as if it was their fate, tightly entwined. Tang Yu thought that she had fallen asleep. He closed his eyes and heard the little girl in his arms ask, Tang Yu, I haven't given you 200 yuan yet. He remembered the story of the 200 yuan and smiled. I thought President Pei would be willing to give me an extra 100 yuan because of my performance last night. Oh, count me in too. Pei Chi-Chi buried her head and said in a muffled voice. Tang Yu thought for a moment. Yeah, I told you that Mrs. Tang's sweet nothings are getting better and better. He paused and continued in a voice that made people's hair stand on end. So, in order to praise Mrs. Tang, Mr. Tang has decided to do it. As he said that, he was about to whip her mercilessly, Pei Chi hugged his waist shamelessly and said in a small voice, "I don't care. I don't want it anymore." Tang Yu lowered his head and said in a warm voice, "Then in the future, say nice things. Baby, be good." The little girl in his arms nodded obediently. "Got it, big brother." Tang Yu suppressed his hot blood and lowered his head to kiss her forehead. "Little naughty thing, you still dare to provoke me." Ha! She was really becoming more and more perverted. Pei Chi giggled and buried her little face in his neck. After a long time, she said softly, "Tang Yu, I feel so happy. If Tang Xian's illness could be cured, she could see Tang Xian get married. That would be even more wonderful." Tang Yu did not listen to her for a long time. He looked down and saw that her little face was full of worry. He knew what she was thinking. He kissed her. "Chi, Tang Xian's body is not that bad. Let's take it slowly." His little girl hated the words "take your time" the most. She buried her little face in his arms and bit down hard on his most vulnerable part. Tang Yu wanted to scare her. "Pei Chi, I'm not full yet." "Pervert, beast." "Perverted." However, Pei Shaoqi did not dare to provoke him anymore. He obediently nestled in his arms. After a long time, when Tang Yu was about to fall asleep, Mrs. Tang raised her head and asked him, "Tang Yu, are you still hungry? Do you want me to go down there and feed you?" Mr. Tang's answer was to press her down, and then, after eating the noodle she had eaten, a solid one, he wanted to do that for a long time. Early in the morning, when Pei Chi woke up, Tang Yu was no longer in bed. She turned her body sideways, her fingers stroking his pillow, and she smiled faintly. She did not want to move, nor did she want to get up to find him. Because on a morning like this, he couldn't bear to leave her alone. The door was gently pushed open. Chapter 596. Tang Yu walked in slowly with a large bouquet of white roses in his hands. Under the morning light, he bent down and kissed the cute little thing on the bed. Pei Chi hugged him. They kissed for a while before he let her go. "Do you like it?" he asked hoarsely. She smiled and said, "Are you talking about these flowers or your kiss?" Tang Yu's lips were still touching hers. He chuckled and said, "Mrs. Tang, you can choose both ways." "You're so nice." She kissed him. Tang Yu smiled. He hugged her with one hand and scattered the roses on the white bed with the other. She lay in the middle of the white roses. Her hair was black and her lips were red. She looked so charming. He sat next to her and didn't do anything. He just reached out and touched her red lips. Pei Chi called his name softly and leaned her head on his lap. The morning light shone on them. At that moment it was peaceful and beautiful. But sometimes, beautiful things were short-lived. Just when they were feeling tired, the maid's anxious voice came from outside. "Sir, there's a package outside." "Package?" Tang Yu propped himself up. "Let's wait downstairs." The little maid added, "It's for Mississippi." Pei Chi looked at Tang Yu and hugged his neck coquettishly. "Carry me down." The maid was still at the door, blushing. Tang Yu was the kind of man who was abstinent on the outside, but he was outgoing on the inside. To put it bluntly, he was coquettish on the inside. He looked at Pei Chi and said in a low voice, "Chi. Call me Mrs. Tang." She lay in his arms. She wasn't afraid of him at all. Tang Yu had no choice but to walk downstairs with the little girl in his arms. When he passed by the maid, he said, "Close your eyes." But his Mrs. Tang threw her arms around his neck and kissed him hard. His reputation was ruined. But no matter what, he couldn't bear to be mean to her. When they got downstairs, even Tang Yu couldn't stay calm. Downstairs, there was a little princess made of roses, very exquisite and beautiful. Seeing Pei Chi standing there happily, Tang Yu asked the little maid beside him, who sent it. This was naturally for Pei Chi. He was a man, so of course he didn't need these. The little maid handed him an envelope. This. Tang Yu gestured for her to leave and opened it himself. On the pink card, there were a few congratulatory words and the name Qin Anlin. Most importantly, there was a piece of suet white jade locked in the envelope. What was this? Tang Yu frowned and glanced at Pei Chi, who was still looking around. He instantly felt that his fingers that were cutting the roses were hurting badly. Tang Yu, it's so beautiful. She ran over and hugged his neck like a happy bird. Tang Yu lowered his head and kissed her forehead. He handed the envelope to her. From Qin Anlin. Pei Chi's smile froze for a moment. Then she opened the envelope. It seems that Anlin cares about you a lot. Mr. Tang touched his nose and sat down on the sofa. Pei Chi looked down at the words on the envelope and picked up the suet white jade locked. After looking at it for a while, she ran to him and knelt beside him. Tang Yu glanced at her and drank his coffee, ignoring her. Chapter 597. No. Tang Yu glanced at his little girl again. Why should I be angry with him? Pei Chi hugged him and leaned against him. She looked up at him and tried to please him. I like Mr. Tang's white roses better. Because he had picked them for her in the morning. Perhaps he had planted the roses himself. Naturally, it was different for her. Perhaps her flattery pleased him. Tang Yu was finally willing to kiss her. However, Mr. Tang really had a look of disdain on his face, but Pei Chi was still very happy. She fawned on him like a puppy. Tang Yu, Tang Yu, Tang Yu, it was still a disgusted look. Brother. She looked at him with tears in her eyes. I'll throw it away immediately. Tang Yu looked at the puppy with disdain. Keep it if you like it. But forget about the lock. It was fine as long as she had it from him. The puppy nodded obediently and threw it far away. Then she rushed over and called him brother. Tang Yu brushed away the long hair on her face and kissed her for a while. He kissed her until his voice was a little hot. Then he said in a low voice, "Why are you acting like a child?" Pei Chi wrapped her arms around his waist like a little lunatic. After a while, she buried her little face in his arms and stopped moving. Tang Yu's fingers gently stroked her long hair and slowly straightened it for her. His voice was unbelievably gentle. What's wrong with our Chi? Pei Chi's voice was a little hoarse. She looked up at him. Tang Yu, I still don't feel real. Her voice was very soft, and each word seemed to knock into his heart. Do I really have a family again? She looked at him. Tang Yu smiled warmly and reached out to pull her into his arms. He held her lightly and took today's newspaper with one hand. Pei Chi, you can't deny it. Today's newspaper was filled with news about them. Pei Chi blinked, wiping away the moisture and the last trace of uncertainty in her eyes. A warm and big palm was placed on her furry little head. Chi, you little fool. I'm not a fool. Isn't it? Tang Yu smiled and rubbed her head. Let's get changed and have breakfast. He got up and pulled her up. Patting her butt, he said, hurry up and go upstairs to change. She did not move, but stared at him. Tang Yu tilted his head and chuckled. You want a hug? Pei Chi nodded, and her little hands automatically wrapped around his neck. Tang Yu carried her up and headed upstairs. Pei Chi, you're so heavy, Tang Yu, I like you. Pei Chi, are you going to lose weight? Tang Yu, I love you. In the end, breakfast became lunch, and they shared the sweetness of the morning. Tang Yu took Pei Chi to the surrounding cities for a 2-day vacation. However, most of the time, she played with him during the day and he played with her at night. Although it was a vacation, it was more tiring than going to work. At night, Pei Chi lay on her side, watching the man coming out of the bathroom in only a bathrobe. She pouted and complained, "Tang Yu, I think we should get a clock-in machine at the bedside. I clock in every day to go to work." Mr. Tang, who was about to bend down to kiss her, paused for a moment, and then said meaningfully, "Mrs. Tang, I thought you would need a timer." Chapter 598. Tang Yu was not going to let her off tonight, but at this moment, looking at his little girl's pitiful look, he couldn't bear to do it. Thus, he leaned against the headboard, pulled her into his arms, and kissed her. "I'll let you off tonight." Pei Chi couldn't believe her good luck. She widened her eyes and looked at him innocently. "Mrs. Tang, I can't guarantee that I won't go back on my words if you keep looking at me like that." Mr. Tang took off her little body and lay down, placing her in his arms. He trapped her with his long arms and legs, and his voice was a little hot. "Chi, go to sleep." His little girl insisted on teasing him. She tugged at his bathrobe and whispered, "Big brother coaxes you." Mr. Tang closed his eyes and went through all the major decisions in the company. That was why he didn't do his little girl immediately. The next day, one was full of energy, and the other was dissatisfied. Tang Yu drove her to the Pei Corporation. Before they got out of the car, Pei Chi mischievously kissed his handsome face. "See you tonight, Mr. Tang." Tang Yu didn't move and smiled. "I'll pick you up after work." Pei Chi got out of the car, bent over, and waved at him. He smiled and drove the car away. Pei Chi went upstairs to her office. Little One followed her. "Boss Pei, Marvel's advertisement is scheduled to be filmed today. Secretary President Chin of King Entertainment called and asked you to follow up." Pei Chi sat down and looked up. "Is it still Pei Huan? President Chin hasn't changed his mind." Little One nodded. "Yes, it's still Pei Huan." Little One asked worriedly, "Boss Pei, do you want to avoid it? I or Dink is fine too." Pei Chi shook her head. "No need. I'd be too weak if I were to avoid it." She paused. "Moreover, Marvel hasn't said anything." "I can't say anything. The product was produced by Marvel. No matter what, if they were dissatisfied with Pei Huan, it would be Marvel who brought it up, not the Pei Group." Xiaowen nodded and begged. Then, she looked at Pei Chi pitifully and didn't say anything else. She didn't dare to say that she didn't sleep with Dink that night. Instead, Dink slept with her. Actually, the result is the same. Pei Chi felt that Xiaowen's face was a little red today. However, she didn't like to joke around. It seemed that Little One had succeeded. Little did she know that Dink had slept with her instead. She went to the set after dealing with some work. Xiaowen naturally followed her. It was a little hot in the studio. Pei Huan was standing and taking photos for the audition. To be honest, Pei Huan's appearance was not bad. She was dressed in a pure outfit today and looked much more energetic than before. Qin Anlin stood at the side and watched indifferently, his eyes a little cold. He held a cigarette between his fingers. His posture was relaxed, but there was something lonely about it. Pei Chi thought that her eyes were playing tricks on her. She actually saw a trace of loneliness in Qin Anlin's eyes. She walked over and called out to President Qin lightly. Qin Anlin looked at her and put out the cigarette in his hand. His voice was a little hoarse when he opened his mouth. "I'm coming." Pei Chi stood side by side with him. Before she could say anything, Qin Anlin said to Xiao Wen beside her, "Do you mind buying a bottle of water for me?" Chapter 599. Qin Anlin came from a group of women. When he saw Xiao Wen's expression, he smiled faintly. There are at least 7 or 8 people here. What can I do? He even bent down and whispered into Xiao Wen's ear. What's wrong, little secretary? Are you afraid that I'll do something bad? He was so close to Xiao Wen. Xiao Wen had to admit that this guy was very flirtatious. With a shudder, little one ran out. Qin Anlin straightened his body. The smile on his face had been wiped clean. Pei Chi-Chi's voice was a little indifferent. Don't scare her. Qin Anlin's gaze became unfathomable. He looked at her and chuckled. Pei Chi-Chi, your little secretary must have broken one part recently. Just now, I smelled the smell of puberty on her body. Pei Chi-Chi said coldly, Xiao Wen is not a small star or model in your company. Don't have any ideas about her. Qin Anlin glanced at her again and put his hands in front of him. I don't like such a simple porridge. After saying that, he smiled. Pei Chi-Chi, you should worry about yourself. He said that with a hint of provocation. It was impossible for Pei Chi-Chi not to understand, but she did not respond. She was really stupid. You don't believe me. Qin Anlin smiled and lowered his head. You don't like the flowers I gave you. Pei Chi-Chi's gaze fell on Pei Huan. She said in a low voice, I think it's more suitable for you to say this to Pei Huan. Qin Anlin laughed unrestrainedly. His slender fingers played with the lighter in his hand. He smiled. Me and her. There's nothing else other than physical contact. And I won't touch her in the future. He wouldn't touch any of the celebrities promoted by the company who had embarked on the path of stardom. However, the premise was that Pei Huan didn't court death. However, the possibility of that was very small. Pei Chi-Chi didn't say anything else. She just felt a little sad for Pei Huan. Qin Anlin. Jinrong. Jinrong was so good, and Pei Huan was once so close to love. That was something that Pei Chi-Chi could only dream of, but Pei Huan had gotten it. How could Pei Huan be willing? How could she be willing to give up love and go from man to man? Pei Chi-Chi took something out of her pocket and handed it to Qin Anlin. I'll take the flowers. President Qin, put this away. Qin Anlin looked down. It was the sheep-fat white jade that he had given away. He looked at it for a while before saying softly, Pei Chi-Chi, there's no reason to take back what I've given away. Pei Chi-Chi gently placed her hand on his palm and said in a low voice, Qin Anlin, whether I'm with Tang Yu or not, you're not the one I'm waiting for. His body trembled. It turned out that he had thought that he had concealed it well, or that he had lied to himself. However, in the end, it wasn't that she didn't understand. He slowly closed his palm and smiled faintly. President Pei, you're thinking too much. This is just an ordinary gift. As Qin Anlin said that, there was a trace of undetectable loneliness on his face. He hadn't been in the mood to give a girl a gift for a long time. It seemed that every woman he had slept with either had a role or received a check. It had been a long time since he had given something to the other party. What he gave to Pei Chi-Chi was not an ordinary item. He gave it to her without thinking. He didn't want anything in return. He simply felt that the jade was very white and suited Pei Chi-Chi very well. Chapter 600. Qin Anlin didn't force it anymore. He looked up at Pei Huan, who was filming. She's quite talented. Pei Chi-Chi followed his gaze. Indeed, Pei Huan had a good sense of the camera. It was probably because this might be the only chance for her to become famous, so Pei Huan worked very hard. Pei Chi-Chi watched. She would rather Pei Huan work hard. That way, she would feel better. You didn't expect that, did you? Qin Anlin took out a cigarette and lit it. He took a drag slowly. I have a good eye for people. Pei Huan has potential, but she's not as good as you. Of course, if you say that I cheated on her, it's better to say that she took the initiative to find me. And I'm not bad for a good-looking woman. As Qin Anlin spoke, he smiled again. I also want to know what Pei Chi-Chi's sister tastes like. His words were close to flirting. Pei Chi-Chi naturally ignored him. Qin Anlin smiled. Unfortunately, there's nothing special about her. She was just a woman who had been played by many people. There was no shyness or charm in her. Pei Chi-Chi's face turned cold and she didn't say anything. Qin Anlin didn't talk to her anymore. He went to say a few words to the director and left. He appeared suddenly and left suddenly. Pei Huan was a little unhappy. She was quite happy when Qin Anlin came and tried hard to show him. Pei Huan wasn't stupid. She could only rely on Qin Anlin now, but she didn't expect that Pei Chi-Chi would come. Even though she was shooting a commercial, she could see a touch of tenderness in Qin Anlin's eyes when he looked at Pei Chi-Chi. Qin Anlin liked Pei Chi-Chi. This discovery made Pei Huan feel like dying. Why did every man she met love Pei Chi-Chi? During a break in filming, Pei Huan walked off the stage and drank a bottle of water. She glanced at Pei Chi-Chi and said, "Why? You're already engaged, but you still haven't given up on the entire forest outside. Pei Huan, you think too much." Pei Chi-Chi's voice was a little cold. Pei Huan smiled strangely, and so did her expression. She put down the water in her hand and chuckled. You're just like your mother, destined to be a femme fatale. Pei Chi-Chi looked at Pei Huan coldly. Up until now, I only have Tang Yu. In the future, I won't have anyone else. Pei Huan froze for a moment, and there was an indescribable pain in his eyes. After a long time, she asked sharply, Pei Chi-Chi, do you think I like sleeping with these men? If you didn't force me into a corner, would I have to do this? Pei Chi-Chi looked at her and said calmly, Pei Huan, you made a mess of your life. If you didn't drug Jinrong, if you and Zhou Meilin didn't court death, if Dad didn't leave, today, you won't be like this. Moreover, you were cruel enough to abort Jinrong's child. You've never loved Jinrong, Pei Huan. You only love yourself. Pei Chi-Chi smiled bitterly. Pei Huan looked at her expression and giggled. What about you, Pei Chi-Chi? You're a winner in life now, but what's with your expression now? Even you, Pei Chi-Chi, have regrets, don't you? Pei Huan laughed in a strange and unpleasant voice. Jinrong is your regret. You must be very regretful, right? Pei Chi-Chi did not say anything else, because it was impossible to talk to Pei Huan, or perhaps Pei Huan was unwilling to admit that she had done something wrong. Didn't Pei Huan miss the child she had lost at night? Chapter 601. Because Pei Huan used to like Jinrong so much so that she disregarded everything else. Pei Chi-Chi lowered her gaze. I only regret not talking to him more when he was awake. A few days ago, Tang Yu had brought her to see Jinrong. He had let her go in alone, and she had told Jinrong that she was with Tang Yu. She thought that she had to tell him. Pei Huan's face was a little twisted, and her lips trembled. She was about to say something when the director called for her. She looked at Pei Chi-Chi and said in a low voice, Pei Chi-Chi, I won't let you have such a good time. Pei Chi-Chi did not say anything. She watched as Pei Huan worked hard in the studio according to the director's instructions. She only left in the afternoon. In the following 2 days, she would occasionally check on the progress and give some suggestions. However, she had never made things difficult for Pei Huan, even though she had the right to. However, she had never done so. Little Wen stood and watched with Pei Chi-Chi for a while. Suddenly, she leaned over and said in a low voice, "President Pei, I heard that Pei Huan slept with this director last night." Pei Chi-Chi's heart skipped a beat. She looked at Little One in disbelief. Little One pursed her lips and said in a low voice, "It's not rare in this industry. I've heard that in some television industries, the female lead has to ensure that she has enough scenes in order to get a role. She has to do it beautifully. From the producer, director, producer, and even the lighting designer, she has to sleep with everyone." Pei Chi-Chi frowned. She looked at Pei Huan. The director was talking to Pei Huan about the scenes, and Pei Huan was very serious. Pei Chi-Chi knew that Pei Huan must have realized that she had no chance with Qin Anlin, and that was why she had slept with this director. She pursed her lips and left without saying anything. Pei Huan looked at Pei Chi-Chi's back view and laughed coldly. After the footage was out, Qin Anlin was very satisfied and sent the sample to Pei Chi-Chi. King Entertainment standards were very high. Everything they produced was worth watching. A week later, this commercial was released along with Marvel's new product. Pei Chi-Chi and Tang Yu attended the press conference together, and Pei Huan also attended the event as a spokesperson. At the press conference, Pei Huan's performance was very good and appropriate. Even when the reporters asked about Marvel's products, she could speak clearly and logically, and the media said that she was the best spokesperson. Pei Huan's gaze landed on Pei Chi-Chi's face with a hint of provocation. She then said softly, "Actually, that's not necessarily the case. Marvel is the blood and sweat of my sister and brother-in-law. Of course, I have to do my best to support them." The reporters smelled a hint of gossip. However, this was Marvel's new product launch and Tang Yu was there, so no one dared to cause trouble. However, it did not mean that the reporters were not interested. Pei Chi-Chi glanced at Pei Huan and understood very well. Pei Huan had always been a ticking time bomb. Now, Pei Huan's words were no different from a declaration of war. However, she also knew that things were not that simple. Pei Huan needed money. Previously, she had sold her identity to Old Master Lin for money. Now, she was even willing to cooperate with someone else for money. As for the other person, she would have to ask Mr. Tang. Pei Chi-Chi glanced at Tang Yu unhappily and kept quiet. Of course, her attitude towards that sister was a little cold. Chapter 602. Pei Chi-Chi pursed her lips and only smiled faintly without replying. The reporters didn't dare to ask any further questions in front of Tang Yu. The press conference was a daunting experience, but not a mishap. At the end, it was a group photo. Pei Huan naturally leaned close to her sister and brother-in-law, and leaned on the other side of Tang Yu like a little bird. However, Tang Yu reached out and pressed Pei Chi-Chi in front of him instead of standing next to him. He placed both hands on Pei Chi-Chi's shoulders and looked forward naturally with a smile. His eyes were full of doting and love. At this moment, Pei Huan became the background. Those ambiguous terms were no longer important. Because in Tang Yu's eyes, there was no one else but Pei Chi-Chi. Pei Huan couldn't hold back her smile. Even if she was smiling, she was forcing it. After the press conference, Xiaowen went to the company by herself, while Pei Chi-Chi and Tang Yu had lunch together. Tang Yu opened the car door for her and helped her in. Just as he was about to close the door, a soft voice came from behind, "Mr. Tang." Tang Yu's fingers paused, but he didn't close the door. Instead, he turned around and looked at Pei Huan behind him. Just like in the advertisement, Pei Huan was dressed freshly and beautifully. Her white dress and light makeup covered up her ridiculous past. Tang Yu just looked at her indifferently. His eyes were very indifferent, but even so, a mature man with a high status looked at Pei Huan like this. Pei Huan still trembled a little. "Miss Pei, what's the matter?" He invisibly distanced himself from her. Pei Chi-Chi didn't get out of the car. She probably knew what Pei Huan was thinking, but she wouldn't say it out loud. She trusted Tang Yu and was willing to let Tang Yu handle this kind of thing. Tang Yu turned his head and glanced at Pei Chi. She smiled at him with a mischievous look in her eyes. The corner of his mouth twitched. This little girl. He turned around and looked at Pei Huan. Pei Huan felt that she had been left out. She pursed her lips and said softly, "Mr. Tang, can I hitch a ride?" Tang Yu smiled faintly. "It might not be convenient. I'm going to eat with Chi. Just as Pei Huan was about to say something, Tang Yu paused and said, "There are some matters regarding marriage that we need to discuss." His words shut her up. No matter how thick-skinned Pei Huan was, she couldn't continue pestering him. She could only watch as Tang Yu closed the car door. She watched the car drive away. From the beginning to the end, Pei Chi did not make a sound because of her malicious approach. Pei Chi must have known that it was only because he did not care about her. Pei Huan laughed. Actually, she wasn't that infatuated with Tang Yu. She just wanted to disgust Pei Chi and make Pei Chi uncomfortable. In the car, Pei Chi pinched a certain nobleman. "Mr. Tang, you're charming, aren't you?" Tang Yu put his hands on the steering wheel. He didn't care about her little tantrum. He looked ahead calmly and said, "Am I?" Pei Chi didn't say anything. He tilted his head and smiled. "You don't have to worry about Chi. He wasn't a stallion that any woman would want to bed." Tang Yu didn't know if there was something wrong with him. In short, no matter how attractive other women were, he didn't have any thoughts about them. At least, he didn't have the urge to tear off their clothes to have a look. Mr. Tang was a practical man. Of course, he was also romantic. Chapter 603. From a young girl to old age, she was his, and he was hers. Because of this, his expression was very gentle. Pei Chi bit her finger and looked at the rear-view mirror. Seeing Pei Huan standing there, she said slowly, "Don't make it too difficult for her, okay?" She didn't want Pei Huan to go all out, and she didn't want Pei Huan to become even worse, and it was because of Tang Yu's matter. "Okay." He held the steering wheel with one hand and placed the other on the back of her hand. "Chi, go to GM Hotel later to check on the renovation progress." This was the first time he had talked to her about this. Pei Chi turned to look at him. She was a little surprised. Tang Yu smiled. "We'll get married in 4 months. Of course, she wasn't pregnant right now. Otherwise, the wedding would probably be brought forward." Pei Chi's heart was beating a little fast and her legs were a little weak. So soon. It happened to be a red light. Tang Yu smiled and put his finger on her belly. He said slowly, "Chi, perhaps you already have a child by now." Her little face blushed. "It's clearly a safe period. We'll have one soon." Tang Yu smiled. "So it's better to be prepared." He frowned. "I don't like the feeling of losing control." Although their first time was beautiful, it was still a little regretful. He was drunk that night. Although he remembered some of it, he wanted to give her his first time gently while sober. Pei Chi nodded and sat down obediently to let him drive. "Get married. Then let's get married." She leaned back in the seat. Just looking at Tang Yu like this made her feel very at ease. The days were busy and fulfilling. Pei Chi's hard work didn't go to waste. After the launch of Marvel's latest product, the market response was especially good. It exceeded the expectations by 20%. Of course, the spokesperson, Pei Huan, was also popular. She was no longer a small celebrity or model waiting in line for opportunities in the company. She and the Marvel team were promoting it all over the world and were in the limelight, in the president's office of King Entertainment. Qin Anlin was playing snooker lazily when the secretary at the door whispered, "President Qin, Miss Shen is here." Qin Anlin didn't even lift his body. "Let her in." Shen Lian came in with an angry look on her face. Qin Anlin glanced at her and continued to play with his head down. "Why are you here?" Shen Lian stood at the door and walked over slowly. "Why Pei Huan?" Qin Anlin smiled. "What's wrong with her? It looks pretty good. Isn't it popular now?" Shen Lian sneered, "I know your purpose too well. You just want to get close to Pei Chi, don't you?" His gaze swept over her face, paused for a few seconds, and then moved away. "Shen Lian, watch your words. You have no right to question who I use. Pei Huan slept with you, didn't she?" Shen Lian was aggressive. Qin Anlin put down the cue in his hand and turned to light a cigarette. He took a long drag and didn't deny it. "Yes." Shen Lian's expression was very ugly. She knew for sure that he had slept with her, but she hadn't expected Qin Anlin to admit it so readily. She asked sharply, "Qin Anlin, do you have any limits?" He maintained his smoking posture and looked up at her, making Shen Lian's hair stand on end. Chapter 604. Shen Lian's lips moved. She wanted to say something, but she couldn't say a word. Qin Anlin looked at her just like that and sneered, "Are you not feeling well?" "Shen Lian, it doesn't mean that you can have whatever you want. What isn't yours will never be yours." "He was mine," Shen Lian said with difficulty. Qin Anlin looked at her meaningfully and smiled. "Shen Lian, do you think you've had him?" He said cruelly, "When you were with him, he was Tang Yu." But, Qin Anlin looked into Shen Lian's panicked eyes and said slowly, "But now, he's not only Tang Yu, but also Pei Chi. Shen Lian was smart. How could she not see that Tang Yu had already labeled herself as Pei Chi? Rather than saying that Pei Chi belonged to Tang Yu, it would be more accurate to say that Tang Yu belonged to Pei Chi. He doted on her like this, to the extreme, that kind of belonging, from body to soul, there was no longer any place for other women. Shen Lian was stunned. Qin Anlin looked at her quietly. "Shen Lian, I can't help you," because he didn't know what to do. He had fallen in love with a woman he shouldn't have. Once again, he had fallen in love with Tang Yu's woman. This time, it was different from the previous time. This time, he couldn't even touch a finger of Pei Chi's. This time, he didn't even want to destroy the beautiful moment between them. Qin Anlin was proud. He would rather pretend that he had never fallen in love with her. After so many years, who hadn't fallen in love with a few young ladies? On the night of Pei Chi and Tang Yu's engagement, he had a great time with a young model. While his mind and body were very excited, Qin Anlin was a little absent-minded. He called Chi. The young model was also stunned. Then she crawled over and leaned into his arms. "President Qin, I'm Chi." Later, the young model's head was covered with a quilt. Qin Anlin tortured her for the whole night and almost suffocated her to death. It had already been a long time since Qin Anlin had been this excited. However, the moment he lifted the blanket and saw that delicate and beautiful little face, he lost all interest in it for a moment. He kicked the young model out of bed and gave her 2 million yuan. Later, he impulsively gave the mutton-fat jade to Pei Chi. But she didn't want it. If others didn't want it, Qin Anlin wouldn't force them. He had many women, but they were all willing. He wouldn't force women to sleep with him, including Shen Lian. Shen Lian looked at him and took a step back. She forced a smile and said, "Yes, I'm not naive. President Qin must have different thoughts." Qin Anlin's heart skipped a beat. Even Shen Lian could tell. Shen Lian looked at Qin Anlin and said in a hoarse voice, "I'm leaving." She turned around and walked out. She felt that she had embarrassed herself again. Qin Anlin also fell in love with Pei Qiqi. The people around her all liked Pei Qiqi. Qin Anlin stopped Shen Lian. Wait a minute. Shen Lian paused and turned around. He walked towards her slowly. When he was only one step away, Qin Anlin stopped. He looked at her quietly. After looking at her for a long time, he said softly, Shen Lian, find a man who truly loves you. Chapter 605. Shen Lian's eyes were a little misty. She looked up at Qin Anlin. After a long time, she said softly, Anlin, what about you? He smiled. I choose to treat myself better. Shen Lian leaned close to his ear and said in a hoarse voice, Mito. Shen Lian walked out and Qin Anlin continued to bend over and play the bowl. 5 minutes later, Pei Huan knocked on the door and came in. She stood at the side, not daring to disturb Qin Anlin. Shen Lian was here, Qin Anlin said calmly. Have you met her? Pei Huan's heart skipped a beat. She shook her head. No, I don't have much interaction with Manager Shen. Qin Anlin smiled and played the ball. That's for the best. Pei Huan, remember that you are an artist of King Entertainment, not Shen Lian's subordinate. Do you understand? He stood up straight, his gaze unfathomable. I can make you famous, but of course, I can also make you lose everything overnight. Pei Huan bit her lip. She heard Qin Anlin continue, I don't mind if you use some tricks to increase your value, but don't overdo it. Do you understand? Although his voice was gentle, it carried a sense of authority that made people tremble. At least, Pei Huan was afraid of him. Qin Anlin had only slept with her once, and that was in the office when Pei Qiqi saw it. Now she seriously suspected that he had done it on purpose for Pei Qiqi to see. His motive was, Pei Huan felt a tinge of jealousy in her heart, but she said meekly, yes. Qin Anlin didn't say anything else and continued to play the ball. Get out. His tone was businesslike, without a trace of personal emotion. It was as if that day's contact didn't exist. After a long time, Pei Huan was still in a daze. Qin Anlin didn't look up. He just said calmly, Pei Huan, I've been with many women. You're just one of them. There's nothing special about you. Do you understand? How could she not understand? Pei Huan smiled. I got it. Qin Anlin's meaning was very clear, he was a businessman. He only cared about the value of King Entertainment's products. Pei Huan's greatest value now was that she was the spokesperson for Marvel's products. This craze would eventually pass, but if there was a need to hype it up, then her popularity would not dissipate. Right now, what celebrities wanted was popularity. Marvel was selling like hotcakes. After a round of work, Pei Qiqi relaxed a little and asked Tang Yu to fetch Tang Xian. It was already summer, and the weather was not that hot, so it was smooth. However, Tang Yu was a little unhappy. Ever since Tang Xian moved in, Pei Qiqi spent half of her time sleeping in Tang Xian's bedroom. Although he complained, he did not stop her. In the dining room, Tang Yu was quietly reading the newspaper. Then, he frowned. Just then, Tang Xian came down with Pei Qiqi. Seeing Tang Yu's expression, Tang Xian said in a crisp voice, Brother, what are you looking at? You don't look happy. Tang Yu didn't hide it and placed the newspaper in front of Pei Qiqi. Pei Qiqi took it and saw the entertainment news headlines. Recently, Pei Huan was always in the headlines, mostly because of scandals. A female celebrity's routine was to first flirt and then say in a coquettish manner that they were just friends. However, today's news was about Pei Qiqi and Pei Qiqi. The headlines hinted at the feud between the popular celebrity and Pei Chi, who was about to enter a rich family. Chapter 606. Between the lines of that report, it was filled with a sense of persecution. Pei Chi was directly set up as a white lotus, a green tea. This was a crisis without a crisis. Because of Pei Chi's special identity, she could not expose Pei Mingyi's past to the public. That was something Pei Chi could not do. That was the difference between her and Pei Huan. Tang Axian looked at Pei Chi carefully. Chi, she is too shameless. It's her and her daughter's fault. Pei Chi forced a smile. Actually, part of what she said is right. Chi will not be interested in that little bit of property, okay? Tang Axian said indignantly. Chi was going to marry her brother. Any subsidiary company under Xingyuan was bigger than the Pei Corporation. Take over the family property. That Pei Huan must be crazy. Pei Chi looked at Tang Yu. Tang Yu took a sip of milk and pinched her little face. Mrs. Tang, I believe in your ability. She muttered something under her breath. Tang Yu smiled and stood up. I'll wait for you in the car. Oh. She turned around and gestured to Tang Axian. Chi, I'll support you mentally. Pei Chi mimicked Tang Yu's pinching and pinched Tang Axian's little face. If I'm down and out, you can support me financially. I'll be more touched. You don't need my help with Big Brother. Tang Axian smiled, looking like a miser. Pei Chi looked at her smiling face and let go of all the worries in her heart. After getting into Tang Yu's car, he started the engine and asked, Boss Pei, do you need my help? Pei Chi glanced at him. I don't think so for now. However, Pei Chi underestimated the power of the entertainment reporters. The news was overwhelming. Pei Corporation and even Marvel were affected. Pei Huan's weak image gained the support of many fans. There were all kinds of attacks on Pei Chi on the internet for embezzlement. Pei Corporation was in a bad mood and a large number of reporters waited at the entrance of the company. Pei Chi was besieged every time she went to work. Little one felt wronged for her and could not help but throw a tantrum after work. That Pei Huan really doesn't know what's good for her. We didn't make things difficult for her, but she's already acting. Pei Chi sat behind her desk and smiled. You forgot that she is now a movie queen. Little one snorted. Didn't she accept a few third-rate movies? Little one of course. Of course. Little one paused for a moment, looking worried. Boss Pei, this won't do. Do you think we should counterattack? For example. Pei Chi looked up at Xiao Wen and slowly said, for example, Pei Huan takes drugs, or has an improper relationship with the director. Little one nodded blankly. Pei Chi looked down. It's not that I haven't thought of doing that, little one, but I always hoped that Pei Huan still has a path to take. When it came to Xiao Gao, she could still give him a way out. Pei Huan was hateful, but he had the same father as her. She was already miserable. Pei Chi didn't want to force her into a desperate situation. Otherwise, she wouldn't be able to explain it to her father. She wasn't being soft-hearted, but she had no other choice. Little Wen was stunned for a long time before she said softly, Boss Pei, I didn't think it through. I don't blame you. Pei Chi looked at her and said, Xiao Wen, the reason why I showed mercy to her is that she has no way out. Chapter 607. Understanding. Pei Chi smiled. How could Pei Huan be so understanding? She could only tell her to back off. This matter was not difficult to solve. Because she could let it go, Pei Huan could not touch the foundation of the Pei Corporation. Reputation was actually not that important to Pei Chi. Tang Yu did not care, so she did not need to care. Don't do anything for now. When the public opinion outside reaches a certain time, the Pei Corporation will hold a press conference. Pei Chi took out a file from the drawer. Give this to the legal team. It will be useful. Little One opened it and took a look. With just one look, she looked at Pei Chi suspiciously. She did not believe it. Old Boss Pei would not treat Boss Pei like this. They were both daughters, and they were both biological daughters. One had to work like a slave while the other enjoyed a life of ease. Little One did not move, nor was she willing. Pei Chi looked at her. Pei Huan will not be able to take advantage of it. Just do as I say. Little One pursed her lips. It was rare for her to let her emotions get the better of her. Boss Pei might be marrying President Tang, but Boss Pei would have no way out if he did that. Pei Chi smiled. Little One, these do not belong to me. Little One was relieved. As long as Boss Pei thinks it is suitable. She hugged the file. Then I will do it, Boss Pei. Pei Chi nodded and watched Little One go out. She looked at the photo frame on the desk. It was a photo of her and Pei Mingyi. That was the only photo left. Dad, I think if I kill Pei Huan, will you blame me? There was a hint of bitterness on her face. Pei Huan could do whatever he wanted, but she could not. Unless she could put down the burden on her shoulders and let go of the Pei Corporation, she would never be able to do whatever she wanted. When she got off work, Tang Yu came to pick her up. Pei Chi sat in the car and did not say anything. What's wrong? Pei Huan defeated our little girl. Tang Yu smiled. Pei Chi glanced at him and grunted. Not really. Tang Yu suddenly reached out to hold her little hand and said in a hoarse voice, Chi, don't mind those words. Those reporters dug out the identity of Pei Chi's illegitimate daughter, or it could be said that Pei Huan deliberately revealed it. Pei Chi shook her head. Tang Yu, no, I don't care about these things. In the past, perhaps she would have cared, would have been sad, and would have been angry. But now, she wouldn't. Because she had him. It's good that you don't mind. Tang Yu patted the back of her hand. Let's go to Grandpa's for dinner later. Pei Chi tilted her head and looked at him. Is it also because of this? Oh. Tang Yu nodded vaguely and then smiled. It's probably because Grandpa is a little bored and wants to find someone to relieve his boredom. It just so happens that you've hit the nail on the head. Pei Chi looked at Tang Yu with an infuriating gaze. Are you saying that Grandpa treats me as a toy? It's a small toy, Mr. Tang corrected. Chi, you must not know that Grandpa actually likes you very much. Pei Chi couldn't bear this kind of liking. Sure enough, when they arrived at the Lin mansion, old Master Lin asked Pei Chi about Pei Huan with great concern. If it weren't for Pei Chi, old Master Lin wouldn't want to mention Pei Huan. Such a young girl was too cruel. She aborted Jinrong's child, didn't she say that she loved Jinrong? In the end, she only loved Jinrong's appearance and the Lin family's money. Chapter 608. The more the old man looked at her, the more he liked her. However, the old man also had a problem. The more he liked her, the more he liked to mess around. Tang Yu just smiled faintly at the side, not helping any of them. Fortunately, Pei Chi had figured out the old man's preferences, so she didn't cause any trouble. Later, Lin Jinrong's mother came over and called Pei Chi away. She wanted to talk about some women's matters, and Pei Chi finally comforted her. After they left, the old man glared at Tang Yu. What are your plans? Tang Yu held a cup of tea and smiled. What plans? The old man's eyes flashed. I don't believe that you didn't hear the gossip outside. Tang Yu, we still have to take care of the reputation of Xingyuan and the Lin family. Since it's gossip, there's no need to listen to it. Tang Yu looked at old Master Lin. If grandfather cared, he wouldn't have asked Chi-Chi to come over to relieve your boredom. Old Master Lin was a little embarrassed. He said in a rough voice, "How can I be so bored?" Tang Yu just smiled and didn't refute. If grandfather likes, I can bring Chi-Chi back often, to relieve your boredom. Grandfather, you don't have to worry. This girl is thick-skinned. Old Master Lin scolded softly, if you have the time, you should give birth to a few more children for me. As the old man spoke, his old eyes swept over Tang Yu and looked at his young grandson suspiciously. He clearly looked very capable. Why hadn't he done anything for so long? Tang Yu was a man. Being stared at by the old man like this, he naturally understood what the old man was suspecting. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Chi-Chi is still young. Tang Yu, let's go check it out tomorrow. The old man coughed lightly. Young people are under a lot of pressure at work, and it might cause some functional deficiencies. If he continued, it would be hard to listen to him. Tang Yu lost his cool. Grandpa, there's nothing wrong with me. Old Master Lin smiled. It's fine even if you do. Just treat it. When Pei Chi-Chi came back, she heard that old Master Tang was going to treat Tang Yu. She lowered her head and did not say a word. Tang Yu couldn't bear for her to listen to these crude words, so he pulled her back first. In the car, Pei Chi-Chi slowly buckled her seatbelt. Tang Yu's slender fingers gripped the steering wheel as he asked softly, "What did Auntie say to you?" Pei Chi-Chi nodded and carefully took out something from her bag. It was a rare object. Tang Yu looked at it for a long time and just smiled. Keep it well. Pei Chi-Chi looked at him, trying to figure something out. However, Tang Yu had always been secretive, so how could she see anything? When Tang Yu started the car, his heart was a little complicated. He didn't tell Pei Chi-Chi that this object belonged to the old thing of the Lin family. He remembered that when his aunt had just married, his grandmother gave her this. Now, she gave it to Chi-Chi. Tang Yu's heart was a little cold. He had invited authoritative domestic and foreign experts to treat Jinrong, but none of them worked. Did Auntie also give up on Jinrong? However, he wouldn't tell Pei Chi-Chi about this, for fear that she would feel burdened. He just drove the car and took her home. That night, both of them had their own thoughts, so they lay in bed without talking. After a long time, Tang Yu held her in his arms and slowly stroked her long hair with his big palm. Chapter 609. Tang Yu smiled. Silly girl. He hugged her carefully in his arms and said in a low voice, Pei Chi-Chi, listen carefully. I will only get married once in my life. And that person could only be called Pei Chi-Chi. Pei Chi-Chi looked at him eagerly. He hugged her with his long arms and legs and said in a warm voice, go to sleep. If you don't, I can't guarantee that I won't do anything to you. Shameless. Pei Chi-Chi's face was a little red as she pressed her face against his chest, late at night. Just as Tang Yu was about to fall asleep, the little person buried in his arms and said softly, Thank you, Tang Yu. Thank him for waiting for her, thank him for being tolerant of her and for respecting her every decision. Thank him for giving her love. Tang Yu smiled and lowered his head to kiss the little fellow in his arms. He said in a hoarse voice, go to sleep. The next morning, Pei Chi-Chi attended a product briefing with dark circles under her eyes. Boss Pei almost dozed off the entire time, but she was smart enough to cover her face with a document. The person in charge of the meeting was none other than Tang Yu. Tang Yu slept around the same time as her, but he still looked elegant and elegant. Pei Chi-Chi secretly looked at him and secretly sighed. He was really blessed by nature. Sometimes, Pei Chi would wonder if Tang Yu was so energetic because he had 3 kidneys. However, she did not think that was the case. If he had 3 kidneys, why wasn't she pregnant? This had become a sore point for Pei Chi. Tang Axan was not anxious, but Pei Chi was. When she thought about this, she could not help but look at Tang Yu with a burning gaze. Tang Yu was in the middle of the meeting when he suddenly looked at her with a meaningful look. After the meeting ended, Tang Yu said calmly, "Boss Pei, stay for a while." Pei Chi was stunned. Her expression was a little adorable. After Tang Yu and the others left, he went over and closed the door. Then, he returned to his original seat and looked at her. He still looked like a serious elite, but the words that came out of his mouth were not so elite. "Pei Chi, the way you looked at me just now, it was as if you were begging for sex." Pei Chi propped up her pointed chin and said lazily, "You're thinking too much, Mr. Tang." Tang Yu smiled. "If Boss Pei has any ideas, you can let me know at any time." Pei Chi couldn't keep up the act and glared at him, "Shameless, shameless." Tang Yu smiled and suddenly said with a gentle expression, "Chi, don't give yourself too much pressure." How could he not know what she was thinking? She had become strong enough to deal with anything, but the knot in her heart was still Tang Axan, who was still a child. Tang Yu was a little reluctant, not because he couldn't bear for her to have a child, but because he couldn't bear for her to force him like this. Such a young lady, who would blush whenever she saw him take off his clothes, was taking the initiative to cater to him in order to have a child. His heart ached a little. Tang Yu reached out and touched her little head. "Chi, let nature take its course." To be on the safe side, they had all gone for a premarital checkup. There was nothing wrong with their bodies. As he said that, Pei Chi softly nodded and picked up the document. "I'll go back to the office first. There's a meeting in the afternoon, and I need to explain some things to little one." Tang Yu didn't ask her to stay. He only asked the driver to send her back to the office. However, Pei Chi didn't expect a bunch of reporters to be waiting for her at the Pei Corporation. That was because this morning, the popular and pure female star Pei Huan dropped another bombshell. Chapter 610. At that moment, Pei Huan was also at the Pei Corporation. Pei Huan told the media in a tearful voice that she didn't want to see her father's hard work being occupied by others. She wanted to use the power of the law to protect herself. Pei Chi was an illegitimate child, and she, Pei Huan, was the legitimate heir of the Pei Corporation. From the beginning, she stood on the moral high ground. Pei Huan knew the power of the media. It was enough to incite online violence. Little one was already waiting for Pei Chi at the door. She whispered, "That's really a movie queen. She's full of drama. Boss Pei, why don't you leave for a while? Prepare for a press conference." Pei Chi's voice was indifferent. "Inform the legal team to be there. Also, arrange for the reporters to go to the conference room. Of course, if Pei Huan is willing, invite her in as well." Little Wen paused for a moment and then agreed. Pei Chi walked straight to the conference room without a trace of hesitation. Her heart was cold. To Pei Huan, the company and property were the first priority. However, if she didn't care so much about these things, she might not have lost so much. Pei Chi sat alone in the conference room. About 10 minutes later, the reporters entered one after another. No one made a sound and sat properly. After Little Wen and the legal team came in, Little Wen handed a stack of documents to the reporters. "This is a copy of the information this time. Distribute it to everyone." Pei Chi nodded and watched Pei Huan walk in. Recently, Pei Huan had been very happy. She became famous because of the Marvel commercial. She had also received a few good endorsements and 2 supporting roles. However, Pei Chi felt that Pei Huan was still the best at acting. Pei Huan was naturally different today. Her manager, Little May, followed behind her and served her with all her heart and soul. Pei Huan saw that Pei Chi's expression was a little arrogant, but she also felt a sense of pride. Now, she only needed to speak in front of the media and those fools would be led by the nose by her. However, Pei Huan was still too stupid. If those experienced entertainment reporters couldn't even see through her little tricks, they wouldn't have been in the industry for so many years. It was only because she was newsworthy. More importantly, the grudge between her and Pei Chi was enough to be published in the entertainment headlines for a month. Pei Huan really thought that she was a movie queen now. She wiped her tears the moment she entered and said in a weak voice, "Chi, I didn't mean to fight with you. It's just that I can't bear to see my father's hard work go to waste." Pei Chi was still sitting there, somewhat stupefied. Ever since she was young, compared to Pei Huan who liked to pretend to be weak, she knew that she was really cold and unlikable, but she didn't want to pretend. He lowered his eyes and smiled. "Your worries are unnecessary." Pei Huan looked even sadder. "Chi, I know you're still mad at me." Pei Chi sighed inwardly. "Yes, I'm angry. With such good acting skills, you should go and film a good movie. Why waste it here?" She smiled and looked at Pei Huan. After a while, she said, "Since you're here today, I'll explain the supplementary part of my father's will. Your lawyer may not have informed you at the time." Pei Huan was stunned. Supplementary part of his will? Pei Chi smiled faintly and gestured to her subordinates in the legal team to announce Pei Mingyi's supplementary part. According to Mr. Pei Mingyi's will, Pei Chi will have the management rights and all the shares of Pei Corporation. However, Mr. Pei Mingyi's supplementary part states that after Ms. Pei Chi gives birth to a child with Lin Jinrong, the child will inherit 60% of Pei Chi's shares. In other words, Ms. Pei Huan's child will be the biggest shareholder of Pei Corporation. Chapter 611. Pei Huan was stunned. Jinrong's child. Did her father know that she would not give birth to a child? Was that why he made such an arrangement? Now, Jinrong was in a vegetative state. How could she have his child? Pei Huan cried, for herself, for Pei Mingyi, and for that child. For the first time, she regretted aborting the child. She thought that no one would care about the child in her womb. So, her father cared so much. Pei Huan was stunned and did not speak for a long time. The reporters at the scene were in an uproar. That was the truth. In that case, Pei Huan was really overthinking things. In addition, her marriage with the Lin family was short-lived. It was still the same saying, this girl was too dramatic. Look at Boss Pei. Although he was young, he was magnanimous. Pei Chi looked at Pei Huan and said calmly, because now I can't fulfill my promise to my father. Therefore, I have decided to donate 80% of Pei Corporation's profits to the disadvantaged. She took the name list from Xiao Wen. It was dozens of thick pages. She raised her voice. Everyone present has also received this name list. There are detailed records at the back of these names. It records the love that Pei Corporation has given to these organizations. Pei Chi held the document in her hand and said emotionally, up until now, Pei Corporation has donated more than 30 million yuan to society. I think my father's soul in heaven will be comforted. The reporters clapped wildly. There were not many young and compassionate girls like her. However, she was the wife of Xing Yuan's CEO. She would not care about Pei Corporation's money. Steal. That was a ridiculous accusation. Pei Chi bowed to express her gratitude. Finally, her gaze landed on Pei Huan's face. She smiled lightly and said, Pei Huan, I believe you won't have any objections to this arrangement, right? As she spoke, she paused for a moment and flipped to a certain page of the document. Her voice was soft and powerful. Among them, the ones I have helped the most are the girls' homes, so that the children without fathers can be well taken care of. Pei Huan was shocked. Pei Chi did not say anything else. She looked at Pei Huan for a long time and then walked quickly out of the conference room. Some reporters noticed that Boss Pei's eyes were wet when he left. Was he crying? Was it because he thought of old Boss Pei and his own background that he was like this? Looking at Pei Chi, it was practically an inspirational drama. The reporters were busy with the press release, leaving only Pei Huan and her manager, Little Mei, standing there. Pei Huan's expression was a little strange, and Little Mei comforted him. I want to be alone here for a while. Pei Huan's voice was a little soft. Little Mei was startled and went out first. Pei Huan raised her head and did not calm down for a long time. This place was her father's blood, sweat, and tears.
Admittedly, Pei Chi had managed this place very well, even better than when Pei Mingyi was here. Moreover, Pei Chi's story was so touching that even Pei Huan, who had grown up with Pei Chi, was almost fooled. How could she be so naive? How could she believe Pei Chi? Pei Huan laughed until tears rolled down her cheeks. On the other side, Pei Chi walked into the office, and Xiao Wen followed her.
Chapter 612. As she spoke, Little One asked eagerly, is old Boss Pei's supplementary will real? It's fake. Pei Chi's voice was very calm. I forged it. Otherwise, how could I shut Pei Huan's mouth? Little Wen's mouth was wide open. She still could not digest this fact. Boss Pei was too shameless, wasn't she? What's more, this meant that she had Pei Huan in the bag. Pei Huan would not get any benefits at all. Little Wen was about to say something when the door was pushed open rudely. Pei Chi looked up and saw Pei Huan standing at the door with a look of indignation on her face. As expected. Pei Huan was not that stupid. She quickly understood. This was just a trap set by Pei Chi. To think that she was touched. Pei Chi, your acting skills are really good now. Why don't you become an actress? Pei Huan looked flustered and exasperated. Pei Chi gestured for Little Wen to leave first. After the door was closed, she chuckled. If I become an actress, wouldn't I be stealing your job again? Don't think that you are better than me in everything. Pei Huan stared at Pei Chi's eyes. Don't be too confident. Pei Chi looked down and smiled. How would I dare? She looked at Pei Huan with a sharp gaze. Pei Huan, do you dare to say that you did not make a deal with Xinlian? This did not seem like something that Pei Huan would do. Pei Huan had finally turned over. How would she not want to cherish her feathers? How would she want to tear her apart and announce the fact that she was married to the public? How could her little fans stand it? Everything was because of money. Pei Huan was popular, but she lacked money. Xinlian gave her enough money. Under Pei Chi's gaze, Pei Huan had nowhere to hide. She pursed her lips and sneered after a long time. Pei Chi, you are thinking too much. I also hope that I'm thinking too much. Pei Chi lowered her eyes. Pei Huan, can't we start all over again now? Pei Huan's body instantly stiffened. She looked at Pei Chi and couldn't make a sound for a long time. After a long time, Pei Chi laughed, her eyes watery. Pei Chi, do you think everyone is like you? Is everyone like you, able to do anything? She looked at Pei Chi. I don't have a way out, Pei Chi. I'm different from you. I can only rely on myself now, or, her voice was filled with self-mockery. Or one by one, man. Pei Chi could only sigh. She raised her head to look at Pei Mingyi's portrait for a while before her gaze fell on Pei Huan. Enough is enough. Luck will run out one day. That's what I want to say to you, Pei Chi. Pei Huan said, put on her sunglasses and walked out. This was the property of the Pei family. She would take it back one day. As for Pei Chi, she kept staring at Pei Huan's back with a heavy heart. After a long time, she looked away and said softly, Dad, if you know what I'm doing, you will think it's right, right? She didn't kill Pei Huan, but she didn't underestimate her either. It was a compromise. No matter whether Pei Huan was happy or not, Pei Enterprises couldn't be handed over to her. Chapter 613. This storm was easily resolved by Pei Chi. The media said that Pei Chi was the most caring female president and even interviewed her. Of course, they also asked about Mr. Tang's love life. Pei Chi sat in the live stream room and looked at the beautiful host. Then, she smiled awkwardly. My relationship with Mr. Tang. It wasn't good at that time. She frowned and smiled again. Mr. Tang is the kind of person who treats you coldly 1 second and then gives you his heart the next. Is that so? The beautiful host looked interested. But in the eyes of the women in City B, Mr. Tang Yu has always been quite cold. There are almost no female creatures around him. Pei Chi brushed her hair and said, yes, his secretary, Xiao Ran, is one, and she is very beautiful. Pei Chi confessed to Xiao Ran through the screen. Xiao Ran is a very capable and easygoing secretary. The beautiful host hinted that she was going astray even though she felt that Boss Pei was playing a big game. Then, let's go back to the original question. Can you share some interesting stories about Mr. Tang Yu? The beautiful host was still more interested in the noble president of Xingyuan. Pei Chi tilted her face and thought for a while. Yes, I think he is quite refined. Refined? The beautiful host's face was stiff. There was no way to continue the conversation. Pei Chi smiled. Actually, Mr. Tang Yu is not that cold. He is just an ordinary person. Then, Boss Pei, do you hope that Mr. Tang Yu is a cold elite or approachable? The beautiful host took the opportunity to ask. Pei Chi answered directly without thinking too much. It doesn't matter as long as he loves me. Alright, she was stuffed with dog food. Pei Chi recorded such an episode. When she walked out, she bumped into Pei Huan. Pei Huan participated in a variety show. She had good resources recently. The two met in the elevator, and there was no one else. Pei Huan glanced at the high-end suit on Pei Chi. It doesn't feel good to pretend, does it? Pei Chi smiled and looked at the numbers on the elevator. Pei Huan, there are not so many pretenses in life. There is another kind called unimportant or white lies. Pei Huan sneered. I heard that you are getting married soon. How is it? Your family is ruined, and no one is attending the wedding. That feels good, right? Pei Huan, if it makes you feel better, I don't mind. Pei Chi looked at her. Pei Huan looked into Pei Chi's eyes and said coldly, I hate it when you look like you have no desires. In reality, you are more greedy than anyone else. Pei Chi received Jinrong's love, and Jinrong was willing to give up his life for her. When she met Tang Yu, she immediately forgot about Jinrong. Pei Chi, your happiness is built on Jinrong's blood. Don't ever forget that it was you who caused Jinrong to never wake up. Pei Huan's face was filled with determination. Pei Chi suddenly felt tired. Pei Huan's temperament was as stubborn as Zhou Meilin. They were hopeless. She just smiled faintly. If this made Pei Huan feel better, then so be it. Pei Huan just did not grow up. She was just, still running away. Chapter 6:14. Are you done? He grabbed her little hand and naturally pulled her little body into his arms. He lowered his head and kissed her forehead. Pei Chi nodded and looked up at Tang Yu. Yes. Tang Yu smiled. Let's go try on the gown. They made a few calls. Pei Chi looked at him and didn't move for a long time. After a long time, she said with difficulty, didn't you say that the wedding is still 3 months away? Come to think of it, it was already autumn. Tang Yu's gaze was deep. He touched her hair with his warm palm and said hoarsely, it's never wrong to be prepared. Because he was afraid that he would be caught off guard. And this little fool didn't even notice that her period had been delayed by a few days. Oh, Pei Chi said obediently. Tang Yu pinched her little face again and hugged her. Let's go. He helped her into the car, being more careful than usual, but Pei Chi didn't notice it. She had been too busy recently, and she had been looking forward to having a child, so she had neglected it. Tang Yu was going to take Pei Chi to the hospital in a few days. He didn't want to tell this little fool before, because he was afraid that if it wasn't true, she would be under more pressure. After going to the wedding salon to try on the wedding gown, he took her home. Tang Axayan had moved back to Yanhui's place, so it was a little lonely back home. At night, Tang Yu returned to the bedroom from the study. Pei Chi was sitting on the bed in his pajamas, his long black hair hanging down softly. He must have taken a shower. He walked inside, untied his tie and asked casually, "What are you looking at?" Actually, he saw that his little baby was doing prenatal education again. He walked into the bathroom with a smile and heard Pei Chi's soft voice coming from outside. Tang Yu, can you tell me a story later? Tell a story. Tang Yu smiled and took off his clothes to take a shower. When he finished showering and went out, he saw that his little fellow was still leaning against the headboard of the bed. He asked while drying his hair, "The light is so dim. What if I hurt my eyes?" "It's all paintings. It's fine." Pei Chi put down the book in her hand and got up to kneel beside him. She took the towel and dried his hair. He sat on the end of the bed, and she put one arm around his neck from behind and dried her hair with the other. Tang Yu grabbed her little hand and rubbed it. "It's about time." As he spoke, he pulled her into his arms and hugged her as if she was a baby. His movements were especially careful, as he was afraid of crushing her. Pei Chi's slender arms draped around his neck, her eyes filled with affection. "Tang Yu, I can't sleep." He knew what was going on and calmly asked, "Why can't you sleep?" Her soft little body was in his arms. The thin pajamas couldn't hide anything, not to mention that she wasn't wearing anything underneath. Her little hands were wrapped tightly around him, and her face was buried in Tang Yu's chest, nibbling it naughtily. Her voice was also soft. "It's a little hot. I can't sleep." In fact, Tang Yu also felt that her body temperature was a little higher than before. It was probably because of that. He patted her. "Then I'll coax you to sleep." However, the little girl in his arms refused to let go. She rubbed against his arms like a little kitten. Tang Yu was a normal man. How could he not be aroused? Chapter 6:15. He coaxed her and brought her down with him. He carefully placed her in his arms and said in a hoarse voice, "Baby, do you want it?" The little beast snorted and grabbed his bathrobe with her little hands, trying to probe inside. Tang Yu let her do whatever she wanted. He even allowed her to do all kinds of outrageous things to him. There was pleasure, but there was more pain. Pei Chi bit his neck and said softly, "Tang Yu." He did not move. She stretched out her hand suspiciously. Tang Yu did not stop her until she screamed and retracted her hand. He was a pervert. He was obviously. He chuckled and turned over to press her down. He only used his arm to support his weight. Darling, call me brother. She lay under him. Her face was as fresh as a painting, and she was indescribably soft and beautiful. They had been very close recently, especially when it came to sex. They were usually willing to please each other. She hugged his neck with her little hands and looked at his slightly tense face and deep eyes. He was already in love. Brother. Pei Chi called him obediently and then buried her little face in his arms like a little beast begging for sex. Tang Yu's beast blood was boiling. He exhaled with difficulty. Little naughty thing. He lowered his head and kissed her, still supporting himself with one arm. However, his little thing felt that she could not get any closer to him. Her little body was hanging on his neck. Tang Yu chuckled and coaxed her. Be good, take your time. His little naughty thing had never taken such initiative before. She was so passionate that he wanted to kill her. However, no matter how he thought about it, he still had to be careful. As they kissed, his big palm moved downwards. After a long time, Pei Chi bit her lips. Her little face was blushing, and she became soft in his arms. Her little body was covered with a thin layer of sweat, and there was a hint of coldness in the heat. Her breathing was erratic, and she lay in Tang Yu's arms like a small beast, with only a blanket covering her body. Baby. He kissed her little mouth and comforted her with his large palm. Her little hands hugged his neck and slowly tightened. Although she didn't really come, she was really exhausted. With her face against his chest, she could feel his heart beating very fast. After a long time, she calmed down and looked up at Tang Yu. Her voice was a little warm. Tang Yu. He kissed her and said hoarsely, It's okay, Chi. I'm fine. But she could feel his tension. She didn't know why, he only used his fingers. She shifted her body and rested her face on his waist. Tang Yu looked up. Chi. She mumbled, Tang Yu, don't you want to? Of course he wanted to. After that, it was as dazzling as a firework. At the last moment, he pulled her back and hugged her tightly in his arms. His heart was beating so fast that it felt like it was going to jump out of his chest. Pei Chi heard him say 3 words. At that moment, it was so quiet and beautiful. In the middle of the night, she said softly, Tang Yu, go and take a shower. He hugged her and chuckled hoarsely. He kissed her slightly sweaty hair and whispered in her ear, Our baby has improved. She naturally knew what he was talking about. She blushed and hit his shoulder. Tang Yu looked at her delicate little face and felt a little infatuated. Chapter 6:16. His large palm covered her lower abdomen. It would be even more perfect if they had a child. Chi, I'm going to City H for a week tomorrow, he suddenly said. Pei Chi responded with an oh, and then looked up with a pitiful expression. Tang Yu smiled. What's wrong with our boss Pei? Why is he so fragile all of a sudden? She hugged him and said, I can't bear to leave you. He knew that his Chi-Chi's words of love were getting better and better. Mr. Tang lowered his head and kissed her as a reward. Pei Chi looked at him softly. Can you not go? He did not know why, but she seemed to be very attached to him recently. She always felt that she wanted to be with him all the time. I'll try to come back earlier, okay? He hugged her and coaxed her gently. It's quite important. It's about 1/3 of Xingyuan's revenue next year. Pei Chi responded with an oh and snuggled in his arms without making a sound. Tang Yu did not hear her for a long time and thought that she was angry. He looked down and saw that his little girl had fallen asleep. He could not help but smile and reach out to pinch her little nose. Little lazy pig. His large palm moved around her lower abdomen. She should be pregnant, right? His heart was a little excited, and he kissed the child's little mother a few more times. Finally, he got off the bed quietly and went to the bathroom to turn on the shower, to solve his unsatisfied desire. He was not satisfied at all when she flirted with him like that. After a few times, he returned to the bedroom with a touch of coolness and lay beside her. Pei Chi immediately stuck to him and nestled in his arms. He looked at her and could not help but smile. The dissatisfaction just now was no longer important. He leaned over and kissed her little mouth. Good night, Chi. The next morning, Tang Yu only realized how clingy this little girl was. His luggage was packed the day before. Pei Chi saw that he was about to leave and sat on his luggage in her pajamas. Mr. Tang was dressed in a noble manner. He crossed his hands in front of him and looked at his little Chi. In that instant, he could almost imagine what their children would be like in the future. It must be like how Chi was clingy right now, sweet and yet giving him a headache. Chi, you are not a child anymore. He took off her body, holding the suitcase with one hand and kissing her with the other. In the morning light, wearing only her pajamas, she clung to his shoulder and kissed him back, nibbling at him like a puppy. Tang Yu really didn't know what to do with his little girl. He patted her little head and said, I'll come back early, okay? Pei Chi also knew that she was clingy, but she really couldn't control herself. She leaned on his shoulder and looked up at him, then willfully bit him hard in the neck. A bite mark that would last for 7 days. She loosened her mouth and wrinkled her nose childishly. That's good. Tang Yu was amused and rubbed her head. You think too much, Mrs. Tang. There are no other women except for Xiao Ran. And Xiao Ran was the person she trusted the most. Didn't she praise Xiao Ran in the live broadcast room today? Pei Chi finally let go, but Tang Yu still carried her downstairs for breakfast. It was not that they had never separated when they were together, but this time was obviously different. He told her a lot of overbearing conditions and then got into the driver's car and left. Chapter 6:17. The past 5 days had been very difficult for him, because he had been worried, and because he missed his little one. After the summit, there were still 2 days of travel, but he compressed it to 1 day and prepared to fly back to B City the next morning. The night in H City was more prosperous than B City because the nightlife of the Southerners was more colorful. Tang Yu went outside for a smoke in the middle of the dinner. When he returned to the private room, he was surprised to see Pei Huan. She came with a boss. Of course, there must be some shameful things hidden in it. Tang Yu did not have a good impression of Pei Huan, not only because of Chi, but also because of Jinrong. This girl was too cruel to Jinrong, and as an outsider, he felt pity for the child. Pei Huan was very beautiful tonight, and she was also a beautiful girl. Although there were some shameful deals, everyone at the scene respected her. After all, she was a popular female star. While Tang Yu was a little stunned, Pei Huan held the cup in her hand and smiled. Mr. Tang, what a coincidence. On such an occasion, Pei Huan was the spokesperson of Marvel, so Tang Yu naturally would not lose his composure. He nodded slightly and sat down, but in his heart, he was already thinking of finding a time to leave. Pei Huan was a lot more restrained, and she was not as aggressive as she used to be when dealing with people. Tang Yu also sighed in his heart. It was probably because in the entertainment industry, no matter how arrogant and willful a woman was, in front of a sugar daddy, she would lose her temper. The dinner was very lively because of the addition of a young and beautiful girl. At this time, no one remembered that this woman had married the Lin family and used to belong to Jinrong. Tang Yu smoked 2 cigarettes and was ready to leave. The night in H City was brightly lit, and there were luxury cars at the entrance of the hotel. There were BMWs and beautiful women. The driver was already standing in front of the car waiting for him. When he saw Tang Yu coming out, he opened the door for him respectfully. "Mr. Tang, please get in." Tang Yu nodded. Just as he was about to get in the car, a delicate arm grabbed him. "Tang Yu." He turned sideways and was not surprised to see Pei Huan. Her black hair flew in the night, and her delicate face was abnormally red. Her eyes were blurred, and there was a thin layer of sweat on her forehead. Her body was very soft against him, a desire written all over her body. Rather than saying that Pei Huan drank too much, it was better to say that he had taken some kind of medicine. Tang Yu pushed her away without a trace and said indifferently, "You drank too much. I'll send you back." As for whether Pei Huan did it on purpose or was framed by others, he didn't care. Because of Chi-Chi, he was willing to care about her life and death. The driver looked at Tang Yu's expression and said, "Miss, please sit in the front row. I don't get carsick." Pei Huan bit her lips. Under the colorful lights, she was indeed beautiful and moving. Her voice was soft and stubborn. "No, I want to sit in the back seat." She admitted that she was imitating Pei Chi-Chi. However, this was her only chance. Because Tang Yu was in H City, she had the chance to seduce him. If Tang Yu returned to B City, then it would be impossible for her to do anything to him. Tang Yu looked at her for a while, and suddenly helped her into the car. Pei Huan's body fell into the back seat with his strength. Her body leaned against the seat, and her knee-length skirt was rolled up, revealing her tender legs. Her small mouth was slightly open, exuding an invisible seduction that ordinary men couldn't resist. She felt that Tang Yu was only so-so. He got his way so easily. However, the car door closed in front of her.